Happy October, guys, gals, and non-binary pals. I'm Big
And
Fella,
I'm Credo.
and
Welcome
welcome
to
to
Pop
Pop
Talks.
Talks, where we take a slice out of the pop culture pie. For our first episode in the Halloween season, Credo and I are going to be talking about one of the longest-running found footage horror franchises out there. We are talking about the VHS franchise, which began with the first movie, VHS, in 2012, and it had spawned 6 other sequels, one of which just came out earlier this year.
Yeah, dude. And what's great about these VHS movies is the fact that they're told in this frame narrative type of way, where it shows the main story, then cuts away back to the tapes that they're watching, and then it goes back and forth. So I feel like that really adds to the immersion, and that's what I think makes it so great.
Yes, and the one thing that I really like about this franchise is because it is one of the only found footage horror franchises with more than one entry. Because I think at the most, I'm pretty sure if there was another found footage one called Hell House. I think that one had a sequel or two. The only other found footage horror movie that I've seen that had a sequel was Grave Encounters. The first Grave Encounters was great. The second one, not so much. That's the thing with a lot of these found footage movies. They have varying degrees of quality. And I mean, I'm not saying that every entry in the VHS franchise is good. Some are certainly better than others. Like there are a lot of segments, like say in VHS 95 that were or 94. I'm mixing up 94 and 85. A lot of the entries were pretty good, but some not so much. Because for me, it takes a certain type of horror to appeal to me. I mean, I'm into slashers, I'm into supernatural or extraterrestrial horror. And the one thing I like about another thing that I like about this franchise is that they've mixed all that together. Within all the segments of VHS, they've had a different genre of horror to them.
Oh yeah, and this kind of reminds me of the old when we're talking found footage, the old videos you see on YouTube, like hey, we just spotted Slender Man, or we're exploring an abandoned spot, or a lot of these really realistic stuff. It has a really good charm to it, and the reason I say this is because the level of the level of engagement that it creates is second to none. Because with a lot of other horror movies, you can watch stuff like a slasher or even paranormal stuff, supernatural, and in the end of the day, at the end of the day, you're like, okay, it's just a movie, it's just actors and people just doing what the script said. But with these movies, at least it adds more realism to it, and that's why I think it really hits the mark.
Yes, and like Credo said, I mean, obviously, this stuff can't happen in real life that we know of. But when you see, through the eyes of the cameraman, when you see, the horror unfolding, it feels like you're actually in the action or the horror itself. And a lot of those memes, like how to survive a horror movie, be the cameraman, that is not the case in a lot of these movies. Like in almost every segment of the found footage VHS franchise, either the protagonist is dead, has no recollection of the events, or is basically stuck in a fate worse than death. And that's what a lot of found footage movies do. They give the main character hope for a happy ending, and then they just swipe it out from under you. That's what happens in a lot of these movies.
And actually, I want to go over the first part a bit, because in the first part where we're introduced to the thieves and the way they break into the house and watch the tapes, I found those to be somewhat softcore compared to the later ones, because the later ones start to delve into some more supernatural crazy shit that's who the hell came up with this, and then again, when I watch the other films, in one part, I think in the fourth or in the second entry, actually, there was one thing about the doctor, okay, and that one with the doctor and the girl and the deaf girl. I mean, that was so. That was so realistic, but then at the same time, when you start to look at all the environment and the way the whole thing is structured, you're like, what, it's absolutely baffling.
Yeah, I agree. And like we said, these movies, there's typically a frame story going on in the background. Like all the VHS segments that you're seeing are seen through the perspective of the people in the main story. Like how Credo said in the first movie, these thieves break into this house and they watch all the preceding films, and all this crazy stuff is happening all around them in their segment, and that really sets the tone because a lot of these segments are a little messed up because there I have the list right here. Let me see. Another one that was actually in the second entry of the franchise, VHS 2, A Ride in the Park, was where this guy gets bitten by a zombie. And he had a GoPro camera on his helmet, on his bike helmet, and we see through his perspective all the shit going down. Like we see him and a bunch of other zombified people attacking a birthday party. And the one thing that I really liked about that segment is like in one instance where he sees himself through the mirror of a car, he still retains some level of his humanity. And I always thought that part was a little sad because like this virus has turned him into a monster, but some essence of himself is still in there. But the thing is, with a lot of these instances, in any case of zombie fiction, once a person is bitten or is already a zombie, there's no hope for a cure, a hope of getting back to who they were before. So I always thought that added a little sense of tragedy to this.
Yeah, actually, the ones that appealed most to me were the ones that one that took place in the woods, and usually the ones where the characters are kind of like split up, or some characters are alone, and they're like in an area where they're just not very familiar with the environment and all that. That kind of reminds me of like the Wrong Turn movies. If you guys ever like seen those, I remember watching those with my cousin when I was younger, and it was just absurd. You know, what used to happen, like the kills were always just the most over dramatic shit that ever happened, and the enemies always seem to be invincible. So like even in these cases, like they don't seem to win. You know, in these in these tapes, most of the time they're just getting the shit on the stick, and at the same time there's like really no happy ending. So it just shows you the pure, unfiltered gore and just the reality of the whole situation.
Yeah, and I got a reference like one of my personal favorite segments from the second entry VHS 2, which it really messed with me how it ended, was Safe Haven, where a group of people are investigating this cult in Indonesia that are worshiping a demonic figure. It like you don't know what to expect with this one. Like in this one, the kills are brutal. I mean, most of the kills in these movies are pretty brutal to begin with, but these, like, you see a mass suicide unfolding. You see a dude get killed with a box cutter, which still makes me cringe to this day. And I won't spoil the ending because I mean, okay, this movie has like these movies have been coming out for the last decade or so. But I'm sure there are a lot of people who've never heard of these movies, so I don't want to spoil them. The ending to Safe Haven still like messes with me to this day. Like I'm like, okay, like Credo was saying, when we think of like how people, directors, actors, screenwriters, they had to write this down, I think to myself, who came up with this shit?
Yo, yeah, that's some like next level shit to be honest, because with the way they've taken the direction of the films, especially to like the most recent, I haven't seen the most recent film, but the films leading up to it, I feel like the direction has been constantly going into like has been trying to delve into more genres of horror, and I think that's a good thing from one stance because well, a lot of diversity, that's very apparent, but I feel like the essence of the first movie can't really be replicated. In my opinion, it always seems to be with these horror movies is that the first movie is always just a banger, and then the movies that follow are good but not as good, or they're just complete dog shit. So I'm glad they took a good direction, but at the same time, it's like I wish they just stuck to the original a little more and maybe incorporated stuff later on to like create a whole new thing.
Yeah, but I did want to mention like one of the first okay, I could be wrong, I could be mixing it up, but one of the segments that like was really the first of the science fiction genre. Okay, there was the one that the sick thing that happened to Emily when she was younger. That was a segment from the first movie, but the second movie was where they had Slumber Party Alien Abduction, which follows a group of kids as they're having a slumber party and they're being terrorized by these gray aliens. Okay, this segment is one that I still have a hard time watching because you're seeing it through the perspective of the family dog. Like the dog has like a GoPro attached to his harness, and you see everything through the dog's eyes, and it's a very good one. It's very well done. They actually made a spin-off based on this segment called Kids versus Aliens, which, if I remember correctly, was released to streaming. I did watch it a long time ago. I think I watched it when it first came out a few years ago. My recollection of it is vague, but I do remember it was very good. It didn't have the characters from this segment in VHS 2, but it still had a nice charm to it, and I'm still waiting for the sequel.
Yeah, same here actually. And I mean, they also generated a lot of other spin-offs, though I haven't seen the spin-offs myself. But from what I hear from it, it's it takes the series into a different view. It explores things from a different perspective. I like that type of thing, and trying to like get back into alien horror. I'm like, wait, are the aliens immune? Is their weakness water still in these kind of movies or nah?
Well, as far as we can see from the segment, the kids really have no way of fighting back. Like they're kids, like these are young kids, like kids that are still in grade school. I mean, there was a one of the older sisters of the main characters who was present in the story. Like she could have been like a few years younger than us, like high school. But these kids are like in grade school or middle school. They don't know how to fight back, and even if they did, they would probably like resort to Home Alone levels of like traps or something. But they didn't really have a lot of time because these aliens were constantly on them. And from what we saw, we have no idea what the weaknesses of these aliens are. But it definitely like goes to show you like when you ever play a video game where you can't fight back, like Outlast. That's basically what a lot of these characters are going through. A lot of these characters, they're either investigative journalists or your average Joe Schmoes. They don't know the first thing about fighting back against, say, a horrific monster or a freaking death cult. They're literally like on their own.
Yeah, dude, that kind of reminds me of the press L, like press shift to run when in those types of games, because usually in those games you're like, okay, I just started out, I'm in the middle of absolute nowhere, and these guys are chasing me. What the hell do I do? And now being a kid, and now if you remember ever being a kid, you sometimes couldn't even go down the basement without, like, leaving the lights on,
Oh yeah.
because always subconsciously you feel like there's somebody chasing you behind you. And just in general, being a kid, you don't want to like ever be in a situation where you just don't know what the answer is, because you're always relying on people giving you the information, giving you the answers instead of you figuring it out. And yeah, I couldn't imagine what it could be like if I were one of those children, because if I were placed in a situation like this and there was like 5-year-old me, my best bet would probably be pissing on them. That's it.
Yeah, and like Credo said, I'm not ashamed to admit the dark is one of the scariest things in my opinion. I mean, yes, say if like you're going downstairs and you're home alone, you're worried. Like I'm a grown ass man and I still get scared of the dark sometimes. But over time that fear is lessened because as a wise person once said, I don't fear the dark. I fear what hides in it. And that's what I like in a lot of the segments that they do, because sometimes you don't see the threat per se, but sometimes it can be like you can hear it in the distance, or like you can like practically feel that somewhere in the darkness. That's what a lot of these found footage horror movies or horror movies in general like to use, because they want you to feel scared. They want you to have a sense of ambiguity and wondering what the hell is going on.
Oh yeah, facts, bro, facts. And like to keep this like topic going, I'd say a big the big appeal towards these like VHS films would be the fact that, like as I mentioned before, the no happy endings. I think that's a good concept to keep. Because we're always used to seeing a happy ending. We're always like, okay, like we're just looking at the clock. Okay, when's the protagonist just gonna come pull up with a special ability? It's all over. Nobody cares. The monster is dead. Everybody lives happily ever after. In my honest opinion, that works sometimes, and that's a very gray area sometimes, but it's often not implemented correctly. The best way, the best way again, I have to keep saying in my opinion, is just to leave it on a cliffhanger. Because cliffhangers, well, of course, they open the opportunity for sequels, and they just want to leave you on the edge of your seat. You know, you're always just like, okay, what's gonna happen next? What's gonna happen next? What's gonna happen next? And then you start to imagine the scenarios in your head. That's the best part about it.
Yeah, and there was like over the course of like these stories, like there were some instances where like they do sort of mix like action with horror, which is one of my favorite genres. I mean, I've been playing a bunch of Resident Evil 4 lately, and like in the beginning I was like, oh god, I gotta run away from the zombies. But now that I'm like over like 12 hours into the game, I'm like, oh, those zombies better start running because I'm coming for them. But a couple of the segments that have like some elements of that. Like the first one I can think of is Bone Storm, which if I remember correctly was in VHS Viral. In that one, like these skateboarders, like they're getting chased by these zombies with skeletal heads, like they have no flesh, it's just their skulls, and they're able to fight them off. And I thought that was pretty neat because like goes to show that these protagonists they're not helpless. Like they sort of know how to take care of themselves. Or The Subject, which was actually in VHS 94, where this guy wakes up in this lab and he finds that like basically like his lower body part is now like robotic spider legs. And it's not like explicitly stated where the segment takes place, but the director, like the writer and the director, is from Indonesia. So judging by that and also from the dialect, it can be determined that this place is likely somewhere in Indonesia. And basically like it follows the subject like as like he fights through the place, and then it switches perspective to another subject who proceeds to add a gun and a grenade launcher to her arm. And like this is like Doom almost, also except they're killing the police that were trying to kill them. And yeah, it was a little fun segment like that skips away from the horror for a second.
Yeah, dude. I like the polarity actually of action versus handicap situations. So the reason I'd say this is because when you're in a handicap situation, all you can rely on is your creativity. Like you have to look for that next door to go through. You have to look for that next locker to hide in. And in a lot of these movies, you can notice the protagonists. There's always some way for them to like kind of escape the scenario, but that's not the case. They just end up getting fucked over. And like I'm gonna remember one part actually from the first one with the couple going on Route 66 to Route 66. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to fucking butcher the French, but
We
yeah, they went to Route 66, and then the fact that they're always like getting stalked and all that, and this dude's conclusion was when he found the money was gone, he was like, "Hey, did you steal it?" I'm like, dude, that's your wife. I'm pretty sure she didn't take it. I mean, if she did, it would be pretty obvious because she probably would have spent it on something already. So, and then this dude just ends up choking to death in his sleep. So, there's just really no way for him to win. Like, you see where the plot hole is. Not really the plot hole, but you see where the character could win, but they just don't implement it. And there's a reason they don't implement it. It's because the more the characters just die and lose, the better the realism is. So, because in a realistic situation, you just don't think on your feet. Well, you do think on your feet, but you just don't think logically. That's the difference.
Yes, and like Credo said, when it comes to these horror movies that like where the character loses or dies, it can be considered pretty realistic to think about. Because when you're in a situation, say you are one of these people and you're getting chased by people in a death cult or a zombie or a giant freaking monster comprised of like computers and like hardware and stuff. In a lot of these instances, your odds of getting out are not looking good. Like, I mean, I'm not saying that like survival isn't impossible, but in a lot of these situations, panic sets in. Our body goes through the fight or flight response, and a lot of times, especially like in real life situations, like in terms of when people are getting chased by serial killers or other situations like that, a lot of them just like bolt. Like they're literally like Usain bolting, trying to get away. They're not gonna like try to fight back. But one I did want to mention, like in terms of like realism, like I could totally see this happening if these creatures existed. In VHS 94, there was an episode called not the Terror, just Terror. And in this one, initially you see these guys in this compound, And it's outright stated. One reason why I also like this is because it's stated it was somewhere near Detroit. So it follows this white supremacist group, and they have this guy like in this barn. They have this guy in this barn, and what they do is they literally just like put a gun to his head and shoot him, and he just falls over. But then they go back to him, and he's fine. As you watch the story more, you realize that this guy is a vampire, and it just devolves from there. And it's a pretty good one because I think this one perfectly encapsulates what would happen if such creatures existed. Certain people, especially if they were white supremacists, if they got their hands on someone like this, they would basically either torture them, like try to commit them to their cause, and if they didn't, they would probably keep shooting them and shooting them. And needless to say, it does not end well for these guys. Like, I won't give it away, but they do get their comeuppance at the end of this movie. Well, at the end of the segment, I should say.
That's just pure proof that you can't have shit in Detroit, man. Like,
you can't have shit in Detroit.
pretty much, you can't have shit like the. Like, imagine just being a group of people executing a guy, and this dude just doesn't seem to fucking die. I mean, okay, yeah, that's pretty apparent. Thank you, Captain Obvious. But just think about life in Detroit, dude. Because imagine if we had vampires in Detroit. I'm telling you, my job would be a lot harder. Okay, because I mean, it would be like, oh, dude, you could just like shut off the lights at where you work, and I mean, you turn out lights. I mean, where you work, and you're good, dude. But I don't think that's the way it works. Okay, because vampires aren't that stupid.
Yeah, and a lot, like I said, like a lot of these segments, some of them are the highlights of these movies. Like I find my own way to enjoy each of the VHS movies. I would have to say though, my least favorite, because some of them were a little boring, would have to be Viral. But overall, each and every one of them were pretty good. And there was one episode from, I keep saying episode, a segment from VHS 99, which came out 2 years ago, called Suicide Bid, where this girl is trying to get into this sorority, and like she takes, hold up, I have it right here. She performs a suicide bid, only applying to one sorority as her recruitment choice, risking potential alienation upon rejection. And basically, as like part of the initiation, she has to go in this coffin and like basically sit in there overnight. And then it starts to rain. It starts to rain, and needless to say, she gets buried alive. And if that's not bad enough, the local legend that the sorority sisters were trying to summon, which hold up, guillotine. Oh yeah, the goddess of death, also known as the Reaper. Like they were trying to, they were meant to recreate the urban legend. This urban legend shows up, breaks into the coffin, and it's heavily implied that she kills the girl. I mean, we don't see it happen, but considering like it's raining and you see the water coming in, and the next morning the sorority sisters coming back and see that the spot where they buried this girl is now like submerged in water, and like they're like, I feel sick. And I'm like, you should feel sick. You basically condemned this girl to a slow and horrific death. And this is like one segment where I did not feel bad for the victims. Like this would be, if this was a real life situation, and if I saw this unfolding, I'd just pull up a chair and have a bag of popcorn. I'm like, this is the best seat in the house.
Yo, dude, I was thinking, imagine if they made a VHS, like, they used the format of VHS, but they did it in Japan. Because you have no idea how much just straight up messed up stuff just happens in Japan.
Yeah, that is actually a great point, because like to take a side note real quick before we get back into the show, there have been a lot, and I mean a lot, of manga, movies, and other forms of media that have come out of Japan that have been great in horror. Like we have like authors like Junjo Ito, who's written some of the best horror manga out there. I just imagine, like, what if they took like this format of like grainy like visuals and put that into like the VHS format. That would be fantastic. I mean, it'd be scary for sure, but that's good. That means that like you'd keep people like on the edge of their seat. And like I said, there have been a lot of scary movies like Audition. I don't think The Wailing is a Japanese one. I think that's a South Korean movie. But yeah, a lot of manga and anime too, and even real life stories like the case of Junko Furuta. Am I saying her name?
Furuta, yeah.
Junko Furuta. I mean, they made a manga about that already, which I understand like people like try to like write about stuff that happened, but I do not see how writing about one of the most horrific criminal cases I've ever read about in Japan would be worth making a manga over. But yeah, the like that actually sounds like it'd be a great idea.
Funny enough, actually, we're actually going to go down that iceberg soon. Wouldn't you say that? Like with the effed up movies as part of this thing.
Oh yes.
It's yeah, and like that movie about, I mean, that incident with Junko Furuta actually has a movie, and I've seen it. Don't ask me where I found it, but I just managed to find it. And dude, it's like even though they try to make the movie as graphic as possible, it still pales in comparison to what that actual situation was. So like, of course, we'll be delving into that like sometime later. But back to you with the VHS stuff.
But yeah, I still have the list right here, and like I said, a lot of these movies are ah my god, why do I keep hecking up with this? But yeah, these segments, like I said, each one is different, and like I said, a couple of them have even been in, as I said, the spin-offs. One of them was actually based on one of the first segments in the first movie. I don't remember the name of the segment in the movie, but basically, the spin-off movie was called Siren, and it follows a succubus who basically like goes after men and brutally kills them. It was okay. It did not have the same level of like horrific nature as the segment from the first movie, but it still captured like a good sense of like it definitely goes to show you that if a monster was able to like hide like their true self under like the guise of a beautiful woman, how many people would fall under this? Because even like in a lot of horror movies, a dude that typically goes for a hot woman, like say if a hot woman is suddenly showing interest in them, I'm like, dude, you're basically screwed. Like you're basically walking into your own grave at this point.
Yeah, so much for being a simp. But I mean, when I look back at at the VHS franchise, and I start to reminisce about the stuff that I've seen in the past as well, it seems to me that with these movies, I'd actually rate them as pretty underrated. To be honest, I'd give them a pretty good score for what they've done. It's the only problem is that it just doesn't have the market appeal. That's the only fault that it has, but it's not even their fault. So
Yeah, and one there was another segment from I think it's '99. Hold up, it's right. I have it right here. I'm sorry, I keep looking down. I got my phone with the list right here. Yeah, VHS '99 called "The Hell and Back," which basically follows these two guys as they're literally teleported to hell, and they're literally like filming this whole thing going down as they were like going to a New Year's party. And I'm just like, these guys, they like were doing pretty good. They were surviving. They were doing really well with being able to get out of to try and get out of hell. I won't spoil the ending, but it's just like, come on, man, you couldn't have thrown my guys a bone there. But yeah, it was just the interactions between them were pretty good. The imagery of hell, like it literally looked like it could have been real, but it looked like it was filmed like in a desert area. Like it was really really good.
actually, I have no more comments. I'm set for now.
There's one more segment that I wanted to mention. Hold up, I have it right here. There's a there was a segment that was based on the real. Oh yeah, here it is right here. Okay, in VHS 1985, there was a segment called God of Death, and it was actually we found out later it was based around the real life 1985 Mexico City earthquake, and obviously it's fictional, but basically it's basically shows you that like in this segment, I'm sorry, that the god Mictlan, which is an ancient Aztec god, which I have right here, he is one of the principal gods of the Aztecs and is one of the most prominent of several gods and goddesses of death in the underworld. This was like one of the only segments, I think it's the only segment that was actually based around true events. The fact that like they made it like a fictional like interpretation of what was going on with a certain group of people while this earthquake was taking place, I thought that was pretty neat. I mean, you ever hear those stories of like horror movies that are based on real events? Like this was a horror segment like supposedly that like caused this event. I mean, obviously this didn't happen. I mean, like gods like showing up causing un unbridled chaos in a major city. I don't think that's possible. I mean, I do believe in God, but I do not believe that other gods could cause this kind of destruction on Earth.
Yeah, and just you want to go in for the wrap up right now?
Alright, so, yeah, as Credo said, we've gone through about most of the movies, what we felt about them, our favorite segments, so that brings us to our conclusion for today. As always, we love to hear from you. We would love to hear what you have to say about the podcast, like if you have any suggestions for us to cover. But before we end, eventually later down the road, maybe not this month, but further down the line, we will be doing like probably a much longer episode on the fucked up movie Iceberg, which basically has the levels like from the top of the iceberg to like the bottom of it, where we will try to talk about in depth like the most effed up movies out there. I mean, we've either seen some of these movies. I mean, just hearing about them would be enough for me because, like, if they go like into really, really graphic detail, like far more graphic than like what you're used to seeing in rated R movies, I'm not sure I'd ever want to see them. But that will come later down the line. If you have any other messed up movies that you'd like us to cover, either for this month or later down the road, please let us know. As always, our email is jolioentertainment@gmail.com. I'm Big Fella.
I'm Credo.
And we'll see you next time. Peace.